Did you know you can take your own flight training within your own hands, save money, save time, and maybe even become a better pilot? Watch this episode all the way to the end. Pat and I will have some ideas for you that really might work in your favor. And of course, the cost of entry, just subscribe to the channel. That's all we ask. Pat, in the continuing series of DIY in aviation, how you can do it yourself, I am amazed to realize it's actually possible to do DIY flight training. You went to a flight school to get your tickets. I went to a flight school to get my tickets. I didn't realize I could actually take control of a lot of that myself by going the Part 61 route and having access to an airplane.
Yeah, Part 61 is somewhat less structured than Part 141. Anybody that's not quite familiar with those numbers can look them up pretty easily. I think Professor Google knows all. But Part 61 is a relatively informal way to get your pilot certificate. And the thing is that you're learning exactly the same things as you're learning in a Part 141 school, just in a little bit more relaxed is probably not the right word, but perhaps a little bit more informal setting, um, and may require a little bit more effort on the part of the student, but may not.
You know, my local high school aero club recently bought a Cessna 152, and it's a really nice one. They raised the money, they did a great job, and they bought this airplane. But a big part of the reason behind that, our local flight school is really good to the kids in the area. It gives them all kinds of opportunities. And many of them go there to get their full-time training, but they often start in the 152 because they can operate it for less than $70 an hour. And
Hmm.
that's a huge savings over what you're renting an airplane for. The other thing is when you've got access to your own airplane, you can actually negotiate the cost of a flight instructor. And that alone can be a huge savings, can it, Pat?
Yeah, it sure can. I'm in Houston, as you know, and it's a major market with high costs associated with hangar rentals and things like that. It's just the fact of the matter. And those higher costs can be reflected in the cost of the hourly rental rate for the airplane that you're learning to fly in, for the flight instructors that you've employed. All of those things are impacted by just geographically. The fact that it's just a fact.
Yeah. If you're in California or if you're in New York or as you say, Houston, costs are higher than they are if you're out in the middle of no place.
Right.
And sometimes that's an advantage too. When you're out in a rural area where maybe there isn't a big flight school and you're not in a position where you can fly every day, becoming your own DIY flight training center where you're controlling your own flight training really gives you the ability to control your own progress and take a more active role in making sure we're getting things done, working with that CFI to make sure you're on track with the ACS, that the airman certification standard, that you're doing all the things you need to. You can still use a syllabus, you can be as professional as anyone, but because you've got access to your own airplane, whether that's a flying club airplane or a partnership or a co-ownership arrangement, or whether you own one or even borrow one from somebody, that's all legal. You are now acting as an owner, which is a completely different mindset than being a renter. I really think you learn a lot through that process and you start treating the aircraft and your time with it very differently.
Yeah, you can. In smaller markets, I'm sure there are probably hundreds of airports around the country that don't have a flight school. They may be city or county owned, some sort of municipality owned airport, um, and there's really not an FBO there beyond just the building that serves as the place that you park to get gas.
Mhm.
But just because that's the case doesn't necessarily mean that you're out of luck. Um, as you mentioned, renting, there may be airplanes for rent on the field at individuals that have that option available. There may be a flying club on the field. The key there is, does the flying club offer flight instruction? Primary sometimes is is not a possibility with a flying club because of insurance issues. But but certainly buying an airplane or partnering up with someone else to buy an airplane. And then the challenge sometimes in smaller markets is to find a flight instructor, an independent flight instructor. Oftentimes they're there. You just have to do some due diligence to find them. And oftentimes they have a real full-time job. Not that being a flight instructor is not a real job. Quite the contrary, it is, and it's a tough one. But they may have a full-time job as a, who knows, a policeman or a fireman or a petroleum engineer or something like that. And they're only able to instruct in the afternoons, evenings, and weekends or something. And maybe there's a limited number of students that they take, but those options are there. They just may be a little bit more challenging to find, as opposed to a major city or a large city.
Well, let's get down to some brass tacks and talk about actually how this saves you money.
Right.
I've got an acquaintance, I would even go so far as to say a friend, who within the last 6 months bought a training aircraft. He was a student pilot at the time. He is a certificated pilot now, private pilot. But he bought a perfectly good training airplane for less than $30,000. And yeah, that sounds like a lot of money. But when he finishes his training and time building and all that, it's probably still worth $30,000 or maybe even $32,000 because inflation, prices tend to go up.
Could be.
But that operating cost is significantly lower. Instead of renting a plane for 160, 180, $200 an hour, he's now operating an airplane for 50 to $70 an hour.
It's a viable option. Um, as with anything in life, there are upsides and there are downsides. The upside is that you certainly can cut your training costs on an hourly basis down dramatically if you own your airplane. Um, you do have to be prepared that things can break. Maintenance
They
does have to
will.
be.
Things will break.
Well,
There's
I was
no
trying
doubt.
I was trying to be a little more optimistic than that, Jamie. Uh, things can break, and most certainly will at some point. You perhaps are gonna go through a set of tires, during your takeoff and landing phases as a student. You have to change your oil every 25 to 50 hours, depending on whether you have an external oil filter or just an oil screen. There are those kinds of things. Your altimeter, your transponder, all that stuff, pedostatic, all that stuff has to be checked when the annual comes up. Um, unless you're such a quick study that you can buy the airplane out of annual and finish your private before the annual is due. And then it's a matter of, well, do we want to sell the airplane now or do we want to go through the annual and see what surprises await us there?
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, it can be a very economical way to do that.
Yeah, we've got all those additional costs, and those are real. They're unavoidable. That's there. But we're balancing that with we're saving 80 to $100 an hour when we fly. The other
Absolutely.
thing is the flight instructor themselves. As you say, I can find somebody who maybe it's a part-time job for them, or something they do on the side. For instance, like you and I do, Pat, because we're
Mhm.
CFIs and we can do things on the side. But if I go to the traditional flight school, that CFI time is probably going to be priced somewhere in the 60 to $80 range
It very
per
possible.
hour. And,
It,
and the instructor doesn't get that full 60 or $80. They may
that's
get 20 or 30 or 40 of that. But that means you can negotiate with a flight instructor and you might be saying, hey, I'll pay you $40 an hour to instruct me in my airplane. And there are instructors who will say, great. They're probably going to want to check the maintenance on the airplane to make sure it's a
yeah,
good, solid, airworthy airplane.
right.
But now you're saving as much as $100 an hour on the actual aircraft operation, and you're saving another 20 or 30 or $40 an hour on the flight instructor. That really builds in some real savings. And because you're controlling your training, it's less passive, it's more active. You're much more attuned to where am I? What am I trying to do? What's my end goal? What's my path to get there? There's just real advantages to taking the DIY flight training route. It's not for everybody, but if you can see a path to that, if you're that type A person, you might save a lot of money, become a really good pilot. And the great part is when you get to the end of it, you have an airplane to fly. a lot of flight schools don't rent airplanes anymore because they want to keep them for their students. And if I've got an aircraft already ready to fly that I'm comfortable with and I did my training in, man, my time building phase just got a whole lot easier.
Some of those flight schools that you mentioned don't like to rent their airplanes out for certainly for the reason that you articulated. But there are a number of flight schools that can't rent their airplanes out because of insurance issues. If you're
Mhm.
learning to fly there and you're in the solo portion of your flying lessons, yes, you can fly the airplane solo. So yes, you're renting the airplane. But once you get your ticket, their insurance actually precludes you from or precludes them from renting the airplane to you as just simply a renter who's no longer necessarily a student in at the air at that flight school. You mentioned something about negotiating with your flight instructor, and I want to talk about that just a little bit because you and I are both CFIs, and I suspect that we're both a little bit sensitive to this. Um, there is a tendency for some people to think, "Holy smoke, $40 an hour! I'm not going to pay that for a flight instructor." Well, how much do you pay for a plumber? How much do
Mm.
you pay when you take your car to the dealership to have a mechanic work on it? You're talking about engaging a professional who spent thousands of dollars to get where he or she is right now, who's teaching you a skill that could very well kill you
Mhm.
if you don't learn it properly. And you're trying to negotiate over 10 or $15 an hour difference, between maybe what his or her book rate is and what you want to pay. That is being penny wise and pound foolish big time.
And I will add on to that. You may find somebody who says they'll do it for 15 or $20 an hour. That's probably not a CFI who has a lot of respect for their own abilities. And maybe they don't have a lot of experience. They want a few dollars and some flight time. And you may
Yeah,
find somebody else who wants that 40 or $50 an hour. They may be highly experienced with a lot of insight, who have signed off an awful lot of people for their rides and can really shepherd you through the process with confidence.
right.
As you say, you're hiring a professional. It's like getting a lawyer or a doctor or somebody who's you're trusting them with the body of knowledge you need to learn to be safe and the skill set you need to learn to be safe. And you can. And becoming a pilot is a lifetime endeavor. Once you get that certificate, you're always a pilot. You may or may not be current, but you are a pilot.
Yeah.
I'll spend money to get good service. And of course, I wasn't always unbelievably wealthy. It's just, it's absolutely worth it. You're right.
There are there are resources out there for student pilots, regardless of what level of student pilot you are, a private, a sport, or light sport, recreational, private, instrument, commercial, ATP, whatever. There are resources out there that can help you attain each of those levels. YouTube is a lot of stuff. I mean, there's a lot of garbage there, but there's a lot of good information out there as well. There are a number of schools like Gold Seal and the Kings and M0A and others that can help along the way in terms of the ground school portion. But AOPA has a guide, a student guide. It's geared really more towards those that are just starting the process. Probably hadn't been through it yet, but it's really good information. I think we can put it in the comments. We can put a link in the comments there. I think we've done that before in the past with that particular guide um, on how to select a flight school and the questions to ask. But those questions that are in that guide are the same questions that you would ask an independent CFI before you make the decision to hire him or her to do the job. So, just imagine going to your doctor and saying, I realize I need this operation, but I can only pay you $40 an hour to do it.
Yeah,
Good luck with
you
that.
might get a guy you don't want cutting on you.
Yeah, exactly. So, um, again, I get a little bit militant about this. You and I are both musicians, and we've both played in bands, and we've both played in places where it's essentially something called pay to play. You play for free, and all you get is the door proceeds when the throngs, the massive throngs of 5 or 6 people that show up to listen to you play, and you take home whatever the door cover charge was. You're essentially playing for free, and that's devaluing your talent, our talent as musicians, such as it may be. Um, and it's no different. I mean, flight instructors, musicians, doctors, lawyers, engineers, these are professional people who have spent years, um, and sometimes thousands and thousands and hundreds of thousands of dollars to get where they are in life. And that plumber that costs $150 an hour or whatever it is, it may only take him 10 minutes to fix the problem, but he knows what the problem is.
Yep,
And he knows
absolutely.
what screw to turn to fix it, right? Same
You know,
thing with a mechanic.
that's so much of the issue in flight training though, Pat, because people look at the cost and they say, "Wow, that's a big number." But even at $40 an hour, that's a significant discount on what you'd get through a traditional flight school. And you're
Right.
getting good flight instruction now.
Yes.
But I'll throw out one other thing that really does stick with me because, we had talked about a lot of flight schools won't rent airplanes. Let's say Pat and Jamie just got their private certificates and they're thinking they want to be professional pilots. They've got to build a lot of time, get their instrument rating, get their commercial certificate, probably become a CFI so you can teach and build time. It's often an entry level job. If you've got access to your own airplane, there's something you can do to cut the cost dramatically as you're building time that's perfectly legal. And if you do it well, it's a real skill builder. Pat and Jamie decide they kind of like each other. They're enjoying their company. They're both at relatively the same phase and need to build time. So we start planning cross country flights together. And on the way out, you're under the hood and I'm safety pilot. And on the way back, I'm under the hood, you're safety pilot. Under the regulations, for the time we're in flight, we're both logging PIC time at
As
half the
long
cost.
as
So
long as as
go
long
ahead.
as you can only log the time that the guy in the left seat is actually under the hood.
Right, right.
So
So
you can't
if it's
no
a one
takeoffs, no
hour leg,
landing.
we can't both log 1 hour,
No.
but maybe I get point 0.6 and you get 1 hour. And then same thing on the way back.
Yeah.
But we're splitting the time. So now that aircraft that my buddy bought and he's operating it for like $70 an hour, now we're paying $35 an hour for cross country time. And we're
Yeah.
getting hood time. And we're learning how to work as a crew where, okay, Pat, I want you to handle the radios on my leg. On your leg, tell me what you want me to do. I can just do collision avoidance. I can handle the radios. We start learning a whole lot of different skills. And guaranteed, you know something I don't know. And I might know something you don't know. We'll learn from each other along through that process. So this is more than just, oh, go buy an airplane and it's cheaper to learn to fly. This is the opportunity to take your own flight training into your own hands and really put yourself in a position where not only can you accelerate the process, not only can you lower the price, if you're judicious about this, you can get a really good education and you've got an airplane to sell and recoup a good chunk of your money at the end of it if you wish to.
Yeah, on the splitting time thing, I would just caution people that want to do that. Make sure make sure that you're doing it the right way. There are some nuances to that, and the FAA has some interpretations out there. For the life of me, I can't remember the one in particular that refers to this, but there are some interpretations out there as to when a person in the right seat can actually log the PIC time, and there are specific examples,
Mhm.
scenarios in that interpretation. So if you're inclined to do that, do a little bit of research and make sure that it's not going to get kicked back when you sit down for your check ride with an examiner who says, "Oh, how'd this work?" So just be careful about that. It certainly can be done. Just be
Well,
careful.
remember, the FAA is a federal agency, much like the IRS. They'd like you to keep good records. Let's
Yes,
make sure we do this the correct way. And if we do, everything's great. If we don't, nobody wants to be audited.
no, nobody wants to be audited.
Pat, thank you so much. Once again, we've done remarkable work. I've had a wonderful time. I hope you've enjoyed yourself as well.
I have had a wonderful time, Jamie.
Outstanding. So I know our viewers picked something up out of this, and I wish I knew this when I started, but we'll see you back here next time on MadPropsAero on your personal device.
Adios.